close your eyes for a second, and now, imagine you are 5 years old. Really imagine it. Now imagine someone just ripped you from your mother's arms. You don't know where you are. You don't understand the language. And you will never see daylight again. But here's the twist. The man dragging you away isn't wearing a powdered wig. He isn't white. He is praying. And he is praying for your obedience. You see, they told you slavery began with ships and ended with Lincoln. But that was the sanitized version. The easy one. The one that fits in a textbook. The truth? The real nightmare started earlier, lasted longer and cut deeper. This was not the Atlantic. This was the desert. This was Arabia, where men were castrated in silence. Where girls were sold for lust, not labor. Where even Muslims were shackled if their skin was just a little too dark. And you never learned about it because they didn't want you to. Because if you knew what really happened, if you really knew, you would start asking questions that make entire civilizations uncomfortable. So, what have they buried and what you should know that changes the complete history? In this video, let's find out. The story does not begin with European sails on the horizon. It doesn't start with the rustle of Portuguese armor or the cross-shadowed flags of Spanish conquest. No, the chains were already rattling long before Columbus was even born. In the 7th century, as the desert winds howled over the dunes of the Sahara, a quieter invasion was underway. Not an invasion of cannon fire and galleons, but of verses and scrolls, merchants and missionaries. The Arabs had arrived. With camels carrying bundles of salt, gold, and dates, they brought something else, a hunger for human labor, and the belief that some humans were less human than others. From the earliest days of the Islamic Caliphate, slavery was not just tolerated, it was institutionalized. Slavery was woven into law, justified through interpretations of holy texts, and sanctified by custom. The Quran did not invent slavery, but it gave guidelines. And those guidelines, in the hands of men seeking profit, became a doctrine of domination. Arabs began venturing into Africa through Egypt, into Nubia, and across the vast, merciless sands of the Sahara. At first, the trade was small, almost indistinguishable from the older systems of war captives. But soon, it evolved. No longer was slavery just a consequence of conquest. It became a motive, a purpose, a business. The black body became currency. Men were taken to be guards, soldiers, or laborers. Women were seized for concubinage, housework, or sexual exploitation. Children were stolen to be reared in servitude. Blackness was no longer just a skin tone. It became a brand, a marker of presumed inferiority, ripe for ownership. And while the world would later cry out against the horrors of the Atlantic slave trade, the silence over the Arab slave trade was deafening. Even as European galleons would later crowd the West African coast, the eastern routes were already centuries old. In truth, when Europeans began their slave raids, they weren't innovators, they were copycats. The Arab empires had already mapped the routes, built the markets, and rationalized the cruelty. But if this was how it began, the next phase was even darker. A time when the continent itself was carved from within, not only by foreign merchants, but by the boots of desert raiders marching across Africa's heart. Picture this: a line stretching endlessly across the golden sand, the sun a merciless eye above, and nothing but dust and groans breaking the silence. Each footstep is agony. Each cry is swallowed by the wind. This was the journey, not to salvation, but to silence. The trans-Saharan slave trade was not a wave. It was a tide that rose over centuries. Camels replaced ships, and sand replaced the sea, but the destination remained the same: servitude. Arab and Berber merchants raided villages across sub-Saharan Africa, chaining captives and forcing them on death marches across deserts that showed no mercy. Thousands perished under the weight of thirst and heat. The bones that littered the routes were not metaphorical. Travelers like Gustav Nachtigall and Heinrich Barth wrote of trails marked by skeletons, reminders of those who never made it to the market. The numbers are staggering. Between the 7th and 19th centuries, millions were marched northward through desert routes that linked present-day Mali, Niger, Chad, and Sudan to the bustling slave markets of Tripoli, Cairo, and Marrakesh. There were no slave ships here, only caravans of agony, slow-moving, unending processions of chained men, bleeding women, and starving children. And this wasn't just commerce. It was an erasure. Entire villages were depopulated. Kingdoms crumbled under the weight of constant raids. What could have been growing centers of African civilization became ghost towns. The fertile soil left uncultivated, the people gone. The trauma ran so deep that it changed the architecture of the family itself. Fathers gone, sons missing, daughters never returned. And yet, the cruelty was coded in scripture. Slave traders recited verses that made their actions righteous. Black skin was equated with unbelief, and unbelief was a license for enslavement. It wasn't just war that brought bondage, it was theology. The logic was terrifyingly simple. If they didn't convert, they could be enslaved. If they did convert after capture, it was too late. The sin of unbelief had already made them eligible property. The march did not end in the desert. For those who survived, another nightmare awaited across the sea in Zanzibar. A paradise turned into a prison island. From afar, Zanzibar looked like heaven. The breeze smelled of cloves. The waters shimmered like liquid sapphire. But step inside the old market walls, and the scent changed. Cloves couldn't hide the stench of blood and sorrow. Zanzibar, jewel of the Indian Ocean, was, for centuries, the nerve center of the East African slave trade. It wasn't merely a stop. It was the warehouse of pain. Every year, thousands of Africans were funneled through its harbors, bound for the Persian Gulf, Arabia, Iran, and beyond. They were not just traded, they were processed. Children, still unable to speak full sentences, were shackled to carry ivory and supplies. Women, stripped of dignity, were weighed and sold to the highest bidder, not for labor, but for their bodies. Some were shipped to the Sultan's harems. Others vanished into desert homes as invisible property. The slave market was alive with cruelty. Screams echoed through alleyways. Chains scraped against stone floors. The auctions took place beneath the open sky, as if to show the heavens what man was capable of doing to man. But Zanzibar was only the gateway. From there, slave ships set sail to Muscat, to Basra, to Mecca, carrying human cargo like sacks of grain. The Indian Ocean swallowed the cries of those who jumped overboard rather than face what lay ahead. Those who lived became invisible workers in a world that refused to record their names. Here, slavery was not just tolerated, it was industrialized. Arab traders, European merchants, and local African middlemen formed an unholy alliance that ran on the backs of the bound. The profits were vast, the pain immeasurable, and yet few remember this island of horrors. Zanzibar's history is today told with soft tones, its slave dungeons marketed as tourist attractions with no mention of the sexually exploited girls, the flogged boys, the lives extinguished in the name of spice and silver. But the story doesn't stop at the coast. For as the Indian Ocean whispered of Zanzibar's crimes, the bodies kept moving, further inland, further north. Not just to farms, but to harems. Not just to toil, but to mutilation. Because what came next was even darker. Black men weren't just enslaved. They were mutilated by the thousands. Castrated not for crime, but for classification. It wasn't punishment, it was policy. Arab slave traders believed that a black man, strong, virile, and rebellious by nature, had to be broken beyond repair. So they cut. They removed not just the flesh, but the future. The ability to love, to reproduce, to belong to a lineage. And this wasn't rare. It was expected. A tradition born of fear and control. This was done in makeshift centers before men were shipped out, often by those who had done it hundreds of times before. The odds of surviving were less than 1 in 10. This was done in makeshift centers before men were shipped out, often by those who had done it hundreds of times before. The odds of surviving were less than 1 in 10. Most bled to death, screamed into the sand, died nameless and naked. But those who lived became eunuchs, sold for a higher price, used as guards for the harems they would never enter as men, or as scribes and administrators whose lives were shadows of what they could have been. The Arab world prized these eunuchs. Their inability to father children made them safe for courts, for palaces, for intimate roles near royalty and women. But the silence surrounding their creation, the screams silenced, the blood spilled, became one of the greatest taboos of African history. While enslaved men were subjected to brutal physical labor and violence, many women faced a different kind of suffering, one rooted in exploitation and control. Young girls were taken from their communities and sold into concubinage, often fetching higher prices than their male counterparts. It wasn't their labor that was sought, but their appearance, their skin, their hair, their perceived exoticism, and their presumed docility. Some were tragically abused even before reaching the markets. Others were given as gifts to powerful figures in cities like Mecca, Damascus, and Baghdad. In many cases, these women bore children, but not as recognized partners or wives. Their children, often of mixed heritage, were absorbed into the households of their fathers, rarely acknowledged by the lineage of their mothers. Over time, these women and their identities were often forgotten, subsumed by a system that valued their bodies, but not their stories. This was not mere servitude, it was a deeply invasive form of control, one that extended beyond labor into the most personal aspects of identity and lineage. It disrupted families, severed generational ties, and left lasting scars on both body and memory. For every man subjected to physical mutilation, or every woman stripped of her agency, there were many who never even reached those tragic destinations. Their lives were lost long before chains were fastened, vanishing into silence, into the desert, into history unrecorded. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. The Sahara Desert, vast and majestic, became more than a geographic divide. It became a place of quiet suffering. It was where many lives ended, far from home, without witnesses. For each person who reached the bustling slave markets of Cairo or Fez, it's estimated that 2 or 3 others perished along the way. The journey was unforgiving, often taking weeks or even months. With little food, no shelter, and harsh conditions underfoot, those forced to make the crossing faced relentless heat and exhaustion. Many were barefoot, walking across scorching sands with injuries that went untreated. Wooden restraints were fastened around their necks, slowing every step. If someone faltered or grew too weak to continue, they were left behind, without aid, without a proper farewell, without a name carved in memory. Along these long, harsh desert routes, many lives quietly slipped away. Children passed in the arms of their mothers. Mothers held the hands of their daughters until their final breath. Entire caravans faded into silence, their stories lost to the wind. Centuries later, European travelers would write of walking those same paths and coming across skeletal remains, skulls, ribs, and bones half buried by shifting sands, still visible, as if refusing to be forgotten. These were not isolated tragedies, but recurring patterns across generations. The routes from Niger to Libya, from Sudan to Egypt, and from Chad to the bustling markets of the Maghreb became marked by sorrow. What took place was not a single event, but a prolonged period of hardship, a movement of people that unfolded under immense duress for centuries. Yet these journeys were not spontaneous or accidental. They were planned and organized. Slave traders knew the terrain, the dangers, and the human cost. They understood that not everyone would survive the passage, and they accounted for it. Some even carried extra restraints, preparing for replacements along the way. In those cold calculations, human lives were treated as numbers in a cruel economy. The pain behind each loss may never be fully known, but remembering them with care is a small step toward honoring the dignity that was so long denied. But how did slavery exist in parts of the Muslim Arab world when Islam teaches equality? Like other major religions, Islam preached that all humans are equal before God. But over time, some used religion to justify the enslavement of Africans. Though Islam did not create slavery, early Islamic empires shaped and formalized it. From the 7th century onward, scholars focused not on ending slavery, but on managing it, discussing who could be enslaved and under what rules, rather than whether it was right at all. And Black Africans were always in the answer. It started subtly. Slavery was permitted for non-Muslims captured in war. But who decided who was a believer and who wasn't? And what if someone converted after being captured? It didn't matter. Scholars declared that if a person was a kafir, an unbeliever, at the time of their capture, then their soul may have found God, but their body belonged to their master. Freedom, once lost, could not be bought back with faith. Then came the rationalizations. Theologians wrote that Black Africans descended from Ham, cursed by Noah to serve the children of Shem and Japheth. Others said their dark skin was evidence of sin, a mark of divine judgment. Ahmad al-Wansharisi, a leading Maghrebi jurist, ruled that even if a slave from Abyssinia or Sudan converted to Islam, he or she could still be held in bondage because their initial unbelief had sealed their fate. The contradiction was glaring. Islam spoke of justice. The Prophet Muhammad reportedly freed slaves and urged kindness. But in the hands of the empire, even mercy was weaponized. Scripture was bent to the will of traders and sultans. Faith became a tool for commerce, not compassion. And so, Black Muslims found themselves caught in a nightmare. They bowed to the same Qibla, recited the same verses, kept the same fasts, and still, they were chained. Their sin wasn't unbelief, it was being born with the wrong skin. But faith can bind, and faith can also ignite. And one day, in the marshes of southern Iraq, the enslaved decided to burn everything down. They were brought to dig salt from the swamps, tens of thousands of them. Black men, taken from East Africa, shackled together and worked to death in the blistering heat of Basra. Their job was tough, draining the marshes, carrying heavy loads, living in filth with barely enough food to survive. They were told they were nothing, disposable, subhuman. But they remembered who they were. In 869 AD, led by a mysterious man named Ali bin Muhammad, a preacher, a revolutionary, a strategist, the slaves of Basra rose up. It wasn't a riot. It was a war. They built alliances with local discontents, raided caravans, and struck terror into the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate. They took weapons, took cities, and then did the unthinkable. They built their own. For 15 years, the Zanj ruled swaths of southern Iraq. They torched plantations, they seized fortresses. They established their own capital, Al-Muqtara, and dared the empire to stop them. The Caliph sent army after army, and still, the Zanj stood. Their rebellion disrupted trade routes, collapsed entire towns, and nearly toppled one of the most powerful Muslim empires in the world. But rebellion is always met with retaliation. Eventually, the Abbasids broke through. After years of siege, betrayal, and starvation, the rebel stronghold fell. The leaders were captured, thousands were executed, the rest were either re-enslaved or disappeared. But the fire they lit never truly died. The Zanj Rebellion was one of the largest slave uprisings in history, and one of the least remembered. Perhaps because it shamed the empire that claimed moral superiority. Perhaps because it showed the enslaved not just as victims, but as warriors, as strategists, as a people who refused to accept silence. Their blood still stains the soil of Iraq. Their courage still echoes in the rage of the forgotten. And yet, while their revolt ended in 883 AD, the system they fought against did not. because some chains never broke. They just changed hands. They say slavery is over, that the past is buried. But if that's true, why are Africans still being sold today? Back in 2017, in Libya, CNN released footage of young black men auctioned off like cattle. $400, the auctioneer says. Strong boy, good for work. The world gasps. Politicians feign outrage. But this isn't a new horror, it's a revival. In Mauritania, generations of black families are born into slavery. They clean houses they will never live in. They raise children who will grow up to own them. The law says slavery is illegal, but reality laughs in its face. Documents are forged, birth certificates disappear. And no one, not the police, not the courts, intervenes. In the Gulf, African maids are brought in under kafala systems that are little more than modern slavery in disguise. Their passports are taken, their wages withheld, their cries ignored. Some die in silence. Others are sent back, broken and unpaid, as if they were defective goods returned to the sender. This isn't ancient history. This is now. The same roads that once carried salt and slaves now carry oil and silence. The same ports where African girls were sold are now luxury marinas. And the same indifference that allowed it all to happen still lives in policy, in paper, in the blind eyes of governments who know and do nothing. The Arab slave trade, we are told, ended in the 20th century. But did it? Or did it just go underground? Did it just change its name? What do you think? If the Arab slave trade lasted longer and covered more territory than the transatlantic one, why is it still taboo to even talk about it? How many descendants of the Arab slave trade walk this earth today with no idea who they truly are because their history was erased? In the comment section below, tell us, now that you know the truth, what will you do with it? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.